When you finally cut off the narcissist from your life, this happens next. When you finally cut off a narcissist, something changes that they may not expect. At first, you might think the hardest part is losing contact with them. But psychologically, the real change begins when they realize they can no longer control your attention. A narcissist may depend heavily on emotional reactions to maintain their influence over you. Your anger, your explanations, your tears, and even your attempts to make peace can become sources of attention. But when you suddenly stop responding, the entire dynamic begins to collapse, and that is when their behavior may start becoming noticeably different. They may suddenly try harder to get your attention. When you cut off a narcissist, they may not immediately accept that the connection is over. Instead, they may try different ways to get an emotional reaction from you. They could send a casual message as if nothing serious ever happened between you. They might suddenly become unusually kind, emotional, apologetic, or concerned about you. Sometimes, they may even create a small problem simply to have a reason to contact you. The important part is not always the method they choose to reach you. The important part is the reaction they are hoping to receive from you. They want to know whether they still have access to your emotions. If you respond immediately, they may see it as proof that the connection is still active. But when you remain silent, they are left without the response they were expecting. That sudden lack of emotional access can create serious discomfort for someone used to having influence. They may then try to make you question the decision you made. Instead of trying to make you miss them, they may start making you doubt yourself. You might hear things like, "Was it really that bad?" Or "You are completely overreacting." They may tell you that you misunderstood everything or remember the situation incorrectly. These statements can make you revisit the past and question your own judgment. Suddenly, you may start remembering the good moments instead of the painful ones. You might even begin wondering whether you were too sensitive or too demanding. This is where psychology becomes especially important after emotional manipulation. Your mind naturally searches for explanations when a relationship ends in confusion. If the other person keeps giving explanations that protect their own image, you may start doubting your memories. That is why creating distance can become so powerful after a toxic relationship. When you are no longer constantly exposed to their version of events, your perspective gets room to return. Then, something even more confusing may happen. The person who hurt you may suddenly become the person you always wanted them to be. They may suddenly promise to change everything and finally give you the love you wanted. The person who rarely apologized may suddenly become extremely emotional and apologetic. They may remind you of the beautiful memories and promise that everything will be different. For a moment, you may feel hopeful and wonder if giving them another chance is worth it. But ask yourself whether their behavior changed or whether they simply fear losing access to you. There is a major psychological difference between genuine accountability and fear of losing control. Real change is normally demonstrated through consistent behavior rather than emotional promises. A few emotional messages cannot prove that someone has fundamentally changed. Sometimes they may take the opposite approach and stop contacting you completely. Strangely, this silence can become even more difficult for you to handle. You may begin wondering why they have not contacted you or whether they have stopped caring. You might feel tempted to check their social media or send them a message yourself. But this is where emotional conditioning can quietly pull you back into the old cycle. You became accustomed to their messages, reactions, affection, anger, and unpredictable behavior. When that pattern suddenly disappears, your brain may interpret the silence as something that needs to be solved. But silence does not necessarily mean that you made the wrong decision. Sometimes, silence simply means that the old cycle has finally been interrupted. With enough distance, you may also begin seeing the relationship completely differently. In the beginning, you may remember the person you hoped they could become. Later, you may start remembering the person they consistently showed themselves to be. You begin connecting moments that previously seemed unrelated to each other. The constant criticism, confusing arguments, sudden affection, and emotional withdrawal begin forming a pattern. Things that once felt like separate incidents may suddenly look connected. And once you recognize the pattern, it becomes much harder to romanticize the relationship. You stop asking how you can make this person treat you better. Instead, you begin asking why you accepted certain behaviors for so long. That question can be painful, but it can also become the beginning of emotional freedom. You may also experience something that feels surprisingly similar to emotional withdrawal. Cutting someone off does not automatically make you feel peaceful or completely relieved. You may still miss them, think about them, or feel an urge to contact them. You might remember their affection and forget how painful the relationship became. This does not automatically mean that you made the wrong decision. Sometimes, you are not missing the entire relationship as much as you are missing the emotional highs. When affection and rejection constantly alternate, the emotional contrast can become extremely powerful. Your mind starts waiting for the next good moment after every painful experience. When you remove yourself from that cycle, your emotions may need time to adjust. But as the distance continues, the emotional intensity can gradually become weaker. Eventually, you may notice that you are becoming much harder to manipulate. You begin recognizing manipulation much faster than you did before. You notice when someone avoids responsibility or suddenly changes their behavior after losing control. You recognize when an apology is being used to reopen a door rather than repair the damage. You notice when affection appears only after you establish a boundary. Most importantly, you stop believing that you are responsible for fixing another person's behavior. You realize that saying no does not make you cruel or selfish. Walking away does not make you heartless when the relationship repeatedly damages your peace. Protecting yourself does not require permission from the person you are protecting yourself from. You begin understanding that boundaries are not punishments. They are decisions about what you are willing to participate in and what you are no longer willing to accept. And eventually, something even more powerful may happen inside you. You may reach a point where you no longer need them to understand what they did. You no longer need an apology before allowing yourself to move forward. You no longer need them to admit that they hurt you. You no longer need them to agree with your version of what happened. You simply trust your own experience enough to stop arguing about it. And that can be one of the biggest psychological shifts after cutting someone off. The moment you stop needing validation from the person who confused you, their influence begins to weaken. They may still remember you, wonder about you, or even try to return to your life, but you are no longer standing in the same emotional position you were before. You have changed the dynamic by refusing to participate in the old pattern. And perhaps the biggest victory is not making them regret losing you. The biggest victory is reaching the point where you no longer care whether they regret it. Because when you finally cut off the narcissist, you are not simply ending communication. You are ending a psychological cycle that kept you emotionally connected to their behavior. And once that cycle is broken, you finally have space to rebuild yourself. You rebuild your confidence, strengthen your boundaries, and learn to trust your own judgment again. The person they thought they could always influence is no longer available to them. And the person you become afterward may be someone they can no longer manipulate at all.